An arrogant customer, a cruel bet, and a challenge no one saw coming. Could a simple waitress prove something no one suspected? How far could courage and knowledge turn the tables? The warm lights of La Belle Époque glimmered off polished cutlery, casting subtle reflections across the white marble tables. The dining room was full, suppressed laughter, clinking glasses, expensive perfumes mingling in the air. In the midst of this silent choreography between waitstaff and patrons, Sophia Hughes walked with poise and alert eyes, balancing a tray with 2 glasses of Bordeaux wine. No one there would have guessed that beneath that impeccable uniform and polite smile was a woman with a PhD in translation, fluent in 5 languages, with a brilliant international career. To most of the customers, she was simply the polite waitress. But Sophia knew, and that was what hurt the most, that she was so much more than that. 3 years ago, her life had changed completely. When her father fell ill, Sophia gave up international events and declined invitations from overseas universities to care for him at home. The treatments were long, costly, and merciless. When he passed, he left behind not only memories and longing, but a huge debt. With her adoptive mother, Mrs. Margaret, already elderly and sick, and 2 younger siblings to support, Sophia traded conference stages for heavy trays. Working nights, studying opportunities by day, and caring for her family had become her routine. As she walked across the dining room, she heard the metallic clatter of fallen cutlery. One of the new waiters had dropped a knife. Her eyes immediately darted to table 6, a table reserved every Thursday by a client the staff knew well, James Anderson. James owned one of the largest construction companies in the country, young, handsome, and wealthy, but also arrogant, cruel, and above all, bored. He had a habit of turning employees into targets for his games. He was infamous among the waitstaff for whispering provocations to make others laugh. That night, he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by 3 foreign executives, 2 Spaniards, and an impeccably dressed Asian man. The champagne flutes were already poured, and James's relaxed posture made it clear he was in charge. "Table 6, muttered Mark, the maitre d', crossing Sophia's path. "You'll need someone with good English. They want personalized service." He made air quotes with his fingers and gave a resigned look. Sophia nodded. She usually avoided those tables. James had a special talent for making any interaction uncomfortable. But tonight, the restaurant was packed. She had no choice. She walked to the table with measured steps, trying to keep her breathing steady. She felt James's gaze sweep over her, sizing her up with a crooked smile. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said in English, with the flawless pronunciation she usually reserved for diplomatic events. "It's a pleasure to serve you. Would you like to start with appetizers?" The Spaniards exchanged surprised looks, murmuring among themselves. The Asian man tilted his head slightly, watching her closely. James, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, amused. "Interesting," he said in Portuguese. "Who would have thought we'd have such a articulate waitress?" He looked at the executives, winked at one of them, and continued in a low voice. "I bet she won't get past English." Sophia pretended not to hear. She took the orders calmly and stepped away, but inside, the familiar irritation grew. She knew this kind of look, this kind of game. Back in the kitchen, while preparing the next round of drinks, she remembered the nights translating speeches for ministers and business people abroad. The feeling of being in the right place, of being respected. Now, she had to swallow Snickers and arrogance just to make sure the electric bill got paid at the end of the month. When she returned to table 6, James looked even more at ease. The wine had already taken effect, and the conversation with the executives was lively. As Sophia approached, he slammed his hand on the table, drawing everyone's attention. "Gentlemen," he said in Spanish theatrically, "let's make the night more interesting." He pulled out his wallet and took out a few bills. "I bet this young lady," he pointed at Sophia with disdain, "can't serve you perfectly in Spanish and Mandarin. If she can, I'll cover the entire bill. If not, you get a free dinner on the house." The executives laughed. James's Spanish was middling, with noticeable mistakes. but he spoke with confidence. One of the Spaniards raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Sophia paused for a moment, processing. There was no way to refuse without seeming like she was running away. More than that, a quiet pride inside her couldn't stand this kind of gratuitous humiliation. "So?" James teased. "Are you going to try or do you want to run?" She took a deep breath. Her heart raced, but her gaze remained steady. "I can try," she replied calmly, still in English. James smiled, satisfied, certain he had the victory in his hands. He turned to the executives, explaining the game in Spanish. They agreed, curious, unaware they were about to witness something that would change the entire evening. As she stepped away to fetch the next round of drinks, Sophia felt the weight of the challenge. It wasn't just about languages, it was about dignity, about reclaiming, even for a moment, the woman she once was. In the corner of the room, James toasted with the men as if victory were already his. His eyes gleamed with the same mischief as always, but he had no idea who the woman he was about to face really was. And so, between trays and silent bets, the seed of confrontation was planted. Chapter 2. The game begins. The clock in the dining room was nearing 9 o'clock when Sophia returned to table 6 with the drink cart. The executives were chatting animatedly, and James listened with a confident smile, like a man who knew he had the situation under control. As she approached, he straightened in his chair and crossed his arms, ready to begin his show. "Well then, young lady," he said in Spanish, exaggerating the tone, "let's get started. Show us what you've got." Sophia placed the bottle on the table calmly. The executive's eyes turned toward her, curious. There was an almost invisible tension in the air, as if everyone were watching a circus act about to unfold. She knew that any slip-up would be magnified by James, who was eagerly anticipating a mistake. The first Spaniard, gray-haired with a shrewd gaze, fired a quick question about the menu using specific culinary terminology. It was a subtle trap, something anyone who knew a little of the language would likely get wrong. But Sophia responded fluently, using perfect idiomatic expressions, the natural rhythm of someone who lived the language, not just studied it. The man's eyes widened, and he exchanged an impressed glance with his colleague. "Su acento es impeccable," he said, almost too surprised to hide it. "You don't seem Brazilian at all." James frowned slightly but kept his smile. "Beginner's luck," he muttered in Portuguese, just loud enough for her to hear. The second Spaniard joined the conversation, asking more technical questions, this time about wines and cuts of meat, mixing in regional terms. Sophia kept up effortlessly, gesturing naturally, like someone in a debate among equals. With each correct answer, the executives' laughter became more genuine. They were no longer laughing at her, but with her. The atmosphere at the table began to shift. Before, James was the center of attention. Now, all eyes were on Sophia, captivated. Her confidence grew with every answer, not as a performance, but as someone reclaiming her own territory. Here, speaking Spanish, she was no longer a waitress. She was an interpreter, a professional, a woman of substance. James noticed. His smile stiffened, and he leaned forward, determined to regain control. All right, he said in Spanish, lightly tapping his fingers on the table. "But that was easy. Let's see you handle this now." He pointed to the Asian executive who had been observing silently, reserved and attentive. "Why don't you speak in Mandarin?" A brief silence followed. Even the closest waiters slowed down. Mandarin. It wasn't common to hear someone attempt that language in the middle of a New York restaurant. James leaned back in his chair, satisfied, as if he were playing his strongest card. Sophia put down her pen and looked up, steady. Deep down, a spark of challenge lit in her eyes. "With pleasure," she replied, still in Spanish, before turning to the Asian man. She took a deep breath, awakening a part of herself long dormant. When she spoke, the Mandarin words came out smooth and clear, like an old melody she knew by heart. She politely asked where he was from, if he was enjoying the dinner, and whether he preferred jasmine or oolong tea. The Asian executive's eyes widened in surprise. Within seconds, his formal expression melted into a genuine smile. He responded quickly, testing her understanding with colloquial expressions and unexpected questions. Sophia followed each word without hesitation. It was a living, intense, elegant dialogue. Conversations at nearby tables began to die down. First one, then two, until half the dining room was watching this unlikely scene. A Brazilian waitress speaking flawless Mandarin with a foreign executive. James squirmed in his chair. This wasn't in the plan. "What is she saying?" he whispered in Spanish to one of the men, trying to appear calm. But they were so captivated they barely paid him any attention. The Asian executive started truly testing Sophia. He spoke long, rapid sentences, alternating proverbs and cultural references. It was a test worthy of an international conference, not a restaurant. Sophia maintained the pace with elegance, even correcting a technical term he had used ambiguously. He laughed, satisfied. Finally, he rose from his chair, inclined slightly in a bow, and said in Mandarin, "You speak as if you've lived in my country." Sophia responded with the same formality and smiled. The dining room erupted in murmurs and discreet applause. The new waiter dropped a napkin in astonishment. For a moment, the restaurant had become a stage. James was livid. The arrogant smile had vanished, replaced by a hard, tense expression. His hands were sweaty. He looked around and realized the gazes were no longer admiring him. They were in awe of her. That stung more than any insult. "This is staged!" he suddenly shouted, mixing Portuguese and Spanish. "She memorized lines. It's all rehearsed." The table went silent. The executives exchanged glances. John Mitchell, who had been quietly observing from the corner, furrowed his brow. The Asian executive replied briefly in Mandarin, laughing, and shook his head as if to say, "Impossible." James, increasingly frantic, slammed both hands on the table, sending cutlery flying. "It's staged," he repeated, this time in Portuguese, loud enough for half the dining room to hear. The sound echoed through the restaurant. Patrons turned to look. The maître quietly hurried over, fearing a scene. Sophia stood firm, calm, her gaze unshaken, unlike James's flushed, angry face. In that moment, the balance of power had shifted, and he was the only one who hadn't realized he was already losing. Chapter 3. Revealed Voice. The sound of James's hands slamming on the table echoed through the dining room, reverberating against the wood and glass walls of the restaurant. For a moment, everyone expected a collapse, an outburst. But it was Sophia who remained calm. The executives, still amazed by her fluency in Spanish and Mandarin, now watched with heightened attention. John Mitchell, the American with a commanding posture, stood, his eyes fixed on James. Cold, calculating. "Exactly who are you accusing of staging this?" John asked, his voice low but loaded with authority. The contrast between his composure and James's irritation was stark. James swallowed hard, his face pale, veins in his neck bulging. He tried to form words, but each attempt sounded hollow. His hands trembled slightly over the table. You... All of this," he stammered. "This is a farce." "I'm not hearing any lies," the dark-haired executive replied, his voice sharp as a blade. "I'm hearing a woman speaking Spanish better than many natives I know." The Asian executive, who had remained silent until then, stood. For the first time he spoke in Portuguese, the accent of Beijing clearly evident. "Mandarin is not easy to learn, and hers is flawless." James looked around. Patrons had stopped their conversations, waiters froze mid-step holding trays, and a few ladies began whispering among themselves. Maurice, the manager, leaning against the bar, pale, didn't know whether to intervene or just watch. An elegant lady near the window started clapping slowly, a discreet gesture that soon turned into firmer applause, until half the restaurant joined in. Redness climbed James's face. The humiliation he had planned for Sophia was backfiring. All he had expected was to laugh at her in front of important executives. Now he was the target of the silent judgment of the entire dining room. Sophia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the tension and expectation around her. And then she decided she wouldn't hide anything anymore. She looked at James, the man who had spent 6 months humiliating her, making cruel jokes, treating her as if she were less than human. Her voice came out firm, clear, echoing through the silent room. "My full name is Sophia Hughes." Murmurs spread. Some people exchanged glances, trying to process what they had just heard. She continued, "I have a degree in languages with a specialization in translation from the University of New York. I hold a master's in applied linguistics and a PhD in translation and simultaneous interpretation. I was a university professor of foreign languages for 5 years at Harvard University, where I also graduated. I worked as a simultaneous translator at international conferences, corporate events, and diplomatic meetings. The silence in the restaurant was absolute, so deep that the hum of the air conditioner seemed too loud. James, mouth agape, looked as if she had grown a second head. His gaze was vacant, unable to absorb the information. John Mitchell, frowning, leaned slightly toward the table, his eyes narrowing as if trying to recall something. "Sophia Hughes, from New York?" he murmured. Wait a second. You worked at the International Business and Innovation Conference in 2021 at the Grand Plaza Hotel?" Sophia blinked, surprised at the precision of his memory. "Yes, I was one of the lead simultaneous translators for the event." "I knew it!" John exclaimed, incredulous laughter in his voice. I knew you from somewhere." He turned to the other executives, proud. "She translated my keynote at that conference. I spoke about expansion strategies for emerging markets. I remember it perfectly. She was exceptional. The best translator I've ever had. She even captured the jokes I made in English and adapted them into Portuguese without losing the essence." John turned to Sophia, a huge smile on his face. "She made it seem like I spoke fluent Portuguese." "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell," Sophia replied, smiling genuinely for the first time that night. "I remember your presentation very well," he continued, "and I paid $5,000 for her translation. Just 1 day of work. She was worth every cent." He looked at James with a chilling expression. "And you know who you just tried to humiliate, James?" James flinched, unable to respond. John pointed to Sophia, his voice firm. "This woman is one of the most respected and talented professionals in the field of translation in Brazil. She's worked for the UN, multinational corporations, and embassies, and you looked at her and saw just a waitress, someone you could humiliate for your amusement." A customer at another table, the elegant lady, raised her voice, still in disbelief. "Why is a professional like you working here?" Sophia inhaled deeply, her voice slightly trembling but firm. 3 years ago, my father suffered a severe heart attack. He needed urgent surgery and expensive treatments. I gave up everything, took leave from the university, canceled contracts, and used all my savings to save him. I sold my apartment, my car, every cent I had. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink into the room. Caring for him for 3 years took me out of the workforce, and when he passed, I discovered debts and responsibilities I didn't even know existed. I took this job to survive and support my family. The restaurant was mesmerized. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. James lowered his gaze, unable to face her. "Every day I serve people here who spend in one night what I earn in a month," Sophia continued, turning to James. "And you had fun humiliating me, trying to make me kneel if I failed. But what you didn't see is that I have worked for people far more important than you will ever be. I've given lectures, taught diplomats, coordinated international conferences. Working here does not make me any less capable." The absolute silence was now broken only by the growing sound of applause. James was frozen. Patrons, waiters, executives, all watched, impressed, and for the first time the table did not dominate the room. John took a deep breath, calm and cutting. "James, you made a bet to humiliate someone. She not only passed the test, but proved herself 1,000 times more qualified than you ever imagined. He pointed at James, his voice full of disdain. My company and I do not do business with people who treat other humans like that. He paused. The contract is canceled. James swallowed, speechless. The impact of losing a multi-million-dollar deal in front of foreign executives and the entire clientele was crushing. And in that moment, the game had completely turned. Chapter 4. The tide turns. The absolute silence of the restaurant still lingered over the table when John Mitchell stood, his eyes fixed on Sophia with a mix of genuine admiration and respect. The other two executives followed suit, rising slowly, as if each movement were carefully calculated, supporting not only John's words, but also the silent power Sophia emanated. James Anderson remained seated, motionless, his face red, anger contained, humiliation etched into every line of his features. John took a deep breath, his voice firm as it echoed across the dining room. Ms. Hughes, I'm impressed by your skill and professionalism. It's rare to find someone able to express themselves so naturally in multiple languages, adapt to any situation, and still maintain complete dignity. I want to offer you a position at my company, Director of International Relations. Salary, $25,000 per month, plus benefits. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating, but not for Sophia. Her heart raced, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a surge of emotion she hadn't felt in years. $25,000, an amount she had never imagined earning, especially working as a waitress just months ago, still buried under debts and crushing responsibilities. She took a deep breath, letting each word echo in her mind. Mr. Mitchell, she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. A shy smile spread across her face before she could contain it. I accept. I'm very interested and honored by the opportunity. John smiled, satisfied, extending his business card to her. Sophia took it, her hand still trembling, and for a moment simply looked at the simple object of thick paper with elegant lettering. It was more than a card. It was a bridge between years of struggle, sacrifices, and sleepless nights, and a life that finally seemed full of promise. As Sophia held the card, something unexpected began to happen around her. Patrons who had witnessed the scene started approaching tables discreetly, leaving generous tips. For $100 here, $200 there. Small bills adding up to an amount surpassing anything James could have imagined in his bet. Some applauded quietly, others chuckled with satisfaction at seeing justice served. James, still staggering under the weight of humiliation, finally realized there was no escape. With trembling hands, he pulled out his wallet and took out the amount he had promised in the bet. He placed it on the table reluctantly, without daring to meet Sophia's eyes directly. She didn't move immediately, simply waited, keeping her gaze fixed on him, the calm of someone who had finally earned the respect she had always deserved. Thank you, Sophia said at last, taking the money with a calm, almost nonchalant gesture. But her voice was firm, clearly conveying that the victory wasn't just monetary, it was a matter of dignity. James said nothing more. Anger, bruised pride, and the realization that he had been defeated, not just by a waitress, but by someone with skills and intelligence far beyond his imagination, completely overwhelmed him. John, still nearby, simply shook his head, his gaze conveying silent yet total disapproval. Finally free from the weight of that night, Sophia allowed herself to breathe more deeply. Every muscle in her body, tense from accumulated stress, began to relax, letting adrenaline give way to relief. Maurice, the manager, approached discreetly, eyes red, a mix of pride and regret. Sophia, I'm so sorry, he murmured softly. I should have defended you earlier, but I was afraid. It's okay, Maurice, she replied kindly, placing her hand over his in a gesture of understanding. You did what you could. But the night still had a mission for Sophia. Arriving home, still holding part of the tips, her heart tightened seeing Margaret, her adoptive mother, pale on the sofa, eyes half closed, her expression exhausted. Wasting no time, Sophia took the leftover money, $500 from the tips, and gave it to Ryan, instructing him to go straight to the pharmacy to buy all the medicines on the prescription. Priority, as always, was taking care of the family before any personal victory. While waiting for Ryan to return, Sophia sat beside Margaret, holding her hands firmly and lovingly. "Rest, Mom," she said softly, almost maternally. Margaret closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax, while Sophia observed every detail of the woman who meant so much in her life. Ryan came back quickly with the medicines, and Sophia administered each dose with precision. Within half an hour, signs of improvement were visible. Margaret breathed more easily, her blood pressure stabilizing, relief replacing the fear that had lingered in the house for years. Julie, now calmer, approached her older sister, her tear-streaked eyes shining with hope. With her family finally safe, Sophia allowed herself a moment for herself. She sat at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on John Mitchell's card resting before her. It was a symbol of everything she had achieved, a representation of years of silent struggle, nights of worry, personal sacrifices, and unwavering resilience. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe life could be different. "Tomorrow, everything changes," she whispered to herself, almost like a promise. "Tomorrow, a new life begins." And that night, Sophia Hughes, doctor, interpreter, teacher, devoted sister, and daughter, felt the tide finally turn in her favor. The exhaustion of years mingled with the thrill of victory, and for the first time she breathed deeply, knowing that from now on, she controlled her own destiny. Chapter 5. A New Life. 3 months had passed since that night that would forever change Sophia Hughes's life. Now walking through the glass lobby of a modern building on Wall Street, the sense of belonging was overwhelming. The elevator rose quickly to the 23rd floor, and as the doors opened, her own office awaited. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls, a panoramic view of New York, city lights reflecting on neighboring buildings like a carpet of possibilities. The name, Sophia Hughes, Director of International Relations, shimmered discreetly on the door. She took a deep breath, allowing herself a quiet, full smile. The routine was now intense, yet completely different. Between meetings with European executives, negotiations with Asian companies, and coordinating international events, Sophia tasted the satisfaction of accomplishment. Every decision, every plan, and every contact reinforced her competence, reminding her that every exhausting night as a waitress, every sacrifice for her family, had been worth it. No longer invisible, no longer underestimated, she was at the center of her professional universe. In the office, her 5-person team awaited to review the details of a major event, a technology conference featuring speakers from 5 countries. Sophia went through each agenda with the precision of someone who understood not just the languages, but also cultural nuances, diplomacy, and the pace of negotiations. Her colleagues respected her, trusted her experience, and absorbed her leadership without question. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The confidence radiating from her competence was enough. As she walked through the room, her gaze fell on John Mitchell's card, still resting discreetly on her desk. She remembered the first time she held that piece of paper, the mingled feeling of victory and hope. And now, reflecting on the journey that had brought her there, Sophia felt a deep peace. There was no arrogance in her success, no desire for revenge against those who humiliated her. There was only purpose, the certainty that even in the worst moments, she had maintained her dignity intact. Leaving the office that Friday afternoon, she walked down to her car with a sense of mission accomplished. Her family's financial life had completely transformed. All debts cleared, a home in a safe and spacious neighborhood. Margaret's health stabilized thanks to consistent medication and regular checkups, and her siblings growing up with stability and opportunities that had once been unimaginable. Ryan had passed the engineering entrance exam, Julie was getting excellent grades, and Margaret could finally sleep without the constant anxiety over paying bills or obtaining medicines. Every detail of Sophia's life reflected effort, resilience, and love. That evening, she decided to have dinner at a new restaurant in Soho, an elegant yet understated place, perfect for allowing herself a few moments of rest after months of professional intensity. She sat at a table near the window, ordering a simple dish just to savor her first unhurried meal in a long time. She watched the restaurant's movement, the quiet conversations, the clinking of crystal glasses, the aroma of spices and fine wines. Everything seemed different now. Each gesture, each detail, carried the sensation of normalcy hard-earned through sweat and effort. As she mentally reviewed the schedule for the following week's event, a strange feeling ran down her spine. Instinctively, her eyes lifted toward the restaurant's entrance. And there he was, James Anderson. The same arrogant man who, months ago, had tried to publicly humiliate her, now walked through the dining room with hesitant steps, his impeccably tailored suit still elegant, but his expression visibly diminished. There was something in his gaze that was neither anger nor arrogance, but vulnerability, and, in a way, regret. Sophia remained seated, posture straight, breathing controlled. There was no fear, no anxiety, just the calm curiosity of someone who had already won the most important battle, her own dignity. James paused for a few seconds, observing her from a distance, probably trying to measure whether the man he had known, powerful, cruel, confident, still existed in front of a woman he had judged merely a waitress. But Sophia was no longer that underestimated woman. She was a doctor, interpreter, leader, protector of her family, someone who had earned everything through her own strength. James took a deep breath and quickly averted his gaze, as if realizing that any approach would be in vain. But for Sophia, seeing him there did not stir resentment. There was only a quiet clarity. Time and life had balanced the scales. She allowed herself a discreet smile, not of triumph but of recognition of the natural justice that had been restored. As James walked toward the exit, Sophia felt a serenity she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, she could observe someone from her past without being dragged by anger or desire for revenge. Everything was in its rightful place. She returned her focus to the menu, the restaurant, and her own life being rebuilt, each detail reminding her that she was the protagonist of her story. And that night, as she savored every bite, Sophia Hughes felt a complete transformation. Not just financial or professional, but emotional. There was no rush, no anguish, no need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Just the peace of someone who had won her own battles, the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, at the peak of her life, ready for the next challenges, but never again losing the hard-won balance. As the restaurant continued its gentle rhythm, Sophia finally allowed herself to breathe, savor the moment, and appreciate the present. The past of humiliations and sacrifices still existed, but now it was only a memory that strengthened her resolve. And even without the need for revenge, she knew the world, and people like James, would never underestimate her again. The wind of change hadn't just turned, now it blew strongly in her favor. Chapter 6. Closed Circles. The sky over New York was already tinged with orange and violet as Sophia left her office that Friday. 3 months of achievements, changes, and adjustments had now settled into a routine that finally gave her peace. Every detail of her life reflected balance: a spacious and secure apartment, thriving siblings, Margaret's health stabilized, bills paid, and professional projects flowing smoothly. For the first time in years, she could breathe without the suffocating weight of the past. She decided to have dinner alone at an elegant restaurant in Soho. She wanted to savor the freedom, the sense of normalcy, and above all, the silent victory over months of suffering and sacrifice. She sat at a table by the window, watching the street's activity and the interplay of lights on the surrounding buildings. The menu was sophisticated, but she ordered something simple. The joy was in the moment, not in extravagance. And then he walked in. James Anderson, not the arrogant, confident man who had once publicly humiliated her, but someone visibly changed. Thinner, with deep dark circles under his eyes, his suit still elegant, but the imposing aura gone, replaced by hesitancy. There was something in his gaze that caught her attention. Not anger, not arrogance, but vulnerability, regret, and accumulated exhaustion. Sophia saw him pause at the doorway, observing her. No threatening gestures, no provocations, Just him, standing in front of her, without the power he once wielded as a shield. And unlike in the past, Sophia felt neither fear nor anxiety, only quiet curiosity. She knew she no longer needed to prove herself to anyone, and that any encounter now would be measured by integrity, not power or status. James approached the table cautiously, his head slightly lowered. When he sat down, his voice was hoarse, hesitant, yet surprisingly humble. "Sophia, may I talk to you?" She lifted her eyes, assessing him silently. There was no room for resentment in her mind, only calm attention. "You may," she replied, her voice steady, firm, yet kind. He took a deep breath, looking at his hands before meeting her eyes again. I lost everything. The construction company, the contracts, my credibility, my family, my investors. All because of how I acted, because of the arrogance and cruelty I carried." His voice faltered, but there was genuine sincerity. "I was cruel to you, Sophia. I humiliated you. I humiliated others too. And now I see too late how wrong I was." Sophia remained silent, listening to every word. There was no interruption, no need for retaliation. She knew accepting those apologies wasn't for him, it was for herself, to allow life to move forward without resentment, without burden. The past, painful as it was, should not dictate her present. James continued, his voice heavy with remorse. "I'm not saying this because anyone is forcing me. There's no audience, no bet, no advantage. I'm saying it because I need to admit my mistakes, because I need to learn before it's too late." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening with a mix of shame and vulnerability. "Sophia, I was a petty man, a man who believed that power meant humiliation. But I've discovered that it means nothing without respect, dignity, humanity, and you showed me that." Sophia felt a wave of silent compassion. She took a deep breath, letting the emotion pass through her throat, but keeping her serenity. "James, I accept your apology," she said calmly, looking him in the eyes. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace, because holding on to anger would only hurt me. You are already paying for your choices. I don't need to add anything to that." He blinked, surprised, as if he hadn't expected such a response. "You accept it? Really?" She nodded. "I accept. And I hope you learn from your mistakes, that you change, that you treat the next people you meet with respect. That's the only way to repair what you've done, even if only partially." James lowered his head, voice choked. "I will try. I promise I will try. Thank you for listening, and for, in some way, giving me a second chance, even if only in learning." He stood, offered a brief, silent nod, and walked toward the exit. Not as a victor, but as someone who had finally acknowledged his own failure and was ready to face it. Sophia returned her focus to the plate in front of her, but her heart was light. For the first time in many years, she felt true peace, that which doesn't depend on anyone's humiliation, revenge, or external validation. It was inner peace, quiet, born from maintained dignity, rewarded effort, and the strength she had always carried within her. Later, passing by the old restaurant where so many nights of humiliation and sacrifice had unfolded, Sophia paused for a moment. She looked at the lights of the dining room, the tables, the oblivious patrons. A soft smile appeared on her face. That place, once her hell, was now just part of her story, a reminder of how far she had come and how unbreakable her essence was. Arriving home, Sophia was greeted with warm embraces, Margaret smiling yet still cautious, Ryan with pride written across his face, Julie running toward her with the joy of someone reunited with a loved one. The sense of belonging, of home, of unconditional love filled every corner of the house. She could finally rest, without fear, without rush, without worries weighing so heavily. As she settled in the living room, watching her family gathered, Sophia allowed herself to reflect on the journey. The true victory hadn't been humiliating those who tried to destroy her, nor accumulating wealth or status. The real victory was maintaining dignity intact, fighting even when it seemed impossible, rising and moving forward even when all seemed lost. She had proven that a person's worth is never measured by what others think or by what life tries to take away. It lies in the courage to remain whole, no matter the circumstances. And at that moment, Sophia Hughes smiled, calm, confident, and at peace. The past had been faced, the circles closed, and now life finally breathed beside her. If this story reminded you of the strength each of us can have in the face of difficulties, tell me, which moment in your life made you feel strongest? Write it here in the comments, and if you feel stories like this deserve to be shared, leave a like and subscribe so more people can be inspired too.